In these weeks after Easter, the lectionary turns to the book of Acts. Last week, we considered what it meant to be a people gathered, and what it was that we could find in that early Christian community. And we find that the model of Acts for a Christian community, for a gathering, is one of common worship, common practice, common good, and common witness. And that the most distinctive practice of that community gathered that we spoke of in Acts 2 was the community's sharing of goods with each other. For the author of Acts, the Luke Acts Gospel, the kingdom of God is the real world. It's the world we live in. The book of Acts then continues with some stories. And this morning's reading is the fourth of those stories, which is why we skip from chapter 2 to chapter 7. But in those four stories, there are two basic themes that we can find. The first is that the author recounts God's faithfulness to Israel, and he recounts the spiritual authority found in the early church leaders. In those four stories, God moves by acting in powerful and very public ways. The audiences, the people around the apostles, don't really get it. It's almost like this author is using some of the techniques that the Gospel of Mark used to say that the disciple didn't get it, but by being around, everyone else gets it. In this case, no, the audience doesn't. And the centerpiece of everything the apostles say and do is the proclamation of the gospel. The good news, the story of Jesus, what he did, what he accomplished, and how they moved on. And the last part of each story is the reaction of the crowd. There's a variety of responses to the apostles' sermons and stories in these chapters. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the result of a sermon is that hundreds, if not thousands of people are drawn to the way of Jesus. Sometimes, as in today's lesson, the crowd's reaction is not so pleasant, and Stephen ends up losing his life. And while I hope that this morning's sermon may move you, I hope it doesn't move you to pick up any rocks and throw them when we're done. So much is found here. When we pick up our reading this morning, I added verse 54 to the lectionary reading. When they heard these things, what did they hear? Stephen reminded the Sanhedrin, the church council, that he reminded them of Jesus. He was a prophet like Jesus, the commentators call him. He was moved in powerful ways to speak and heal and to work within the church. He was not one of the 12, but one of those who was taken in to the diaconate to help the apostles in the distribution of food and money to those who were in need. Stephen's sermon reminds them all of the foundations of their faith. I challenge you to go home and read Acts 6, 7, and the beginning of 8. Read the story of Stephen and read his entire sermon, because in it he recounts the history of Israel, the history of God working with Israel, beginning with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses. And then he dares, when he's done, to make the connection between Moses being rejected by the people of Israel and the Sanhedrin and the temple authorities turning the people against Jesus. And then they get angry, because we don't like it when someone points out to us where our flaws are. And Stephen wasn't exactly wrapping what he said in diplomatic, nice language. He just hit them right between the eyes. We could say that his sermon was effective because he hit the bullseye, but the effect of his rhetoric was not that great, because they chose to kill him instead of being changed, of convincing them that following Jesus might be a better way than they were acting at. You see, in all that he did, in all of the story that he told, he was trying to bear witness to the work of God with God's people. He was trying to bear witness to Jesus. But yet in the whole sermon, he doesn't refer to Jesus. He's speaking in generalities about God. What he is trying to do, though, is to help them to see that there was a great prophet among them, and that they have not necessarily been following that prophet. They haven't been following what God wanted from them. They were disobedient to God's commands. And so much of what is in Stephen's sermon, so much of what is being said in those days, in all of the stories that are being told in Acts, is against the grain of the culture. It rubs people the wrong way because it makes them see they're not exactly living the way they have been called to do. And when someone reminds us of the things that we are not doing correctly, it irritates us. Let's face it, we're all human. We don't like it when someone says, your breath smells, or when someone says, please, can you change that shirt? You've got gravy all over the front of it. Or please, don't talk like that. Be a little bit more gracious. And in this case, he wasn't just talking about simple day-to-day things, but he was talking about the practice of the temple. The Sanhedrin had elevated temple worship and temple practice to a high level, saying that everything that mattered, that God's grace, God's mercy, and who God was centered at the temple. And Stephen points out to them that God's forgiveness is available no matter where we are. It doesn't matter that we're not in Jerusalem at the temple. God's grace is wherever we are gathered in God's name. Whether we're here at 251 Union Ave, or whether we have gathered down at Tryon Field, or whether we've gathered in Lincoln Park, if we have gathered to praise and to worship God, if we have gathered to tell the story of Jesus, if we have gathered to tell the story of what that impact has been on our lives, and to share that with each other, God is in the midst of us. God is with each one of us. So the Sanhedrin doesn't like being told that everything that they are trying to enforce, all that they want the people to do, really doesn't make a difference. And you're as big a troublemaker, Stephen, as that guy Jesus, and we killed him. And when he gets done, he then has the audacity to connect Jesus and Moses and the rejection of Israel. And then he says, I have seen a vision. I see Jesus sitting at the right hand of God. Actually, he said, no, he didn't say sitting. He says, I see Jesus standing at the right hand of God. Now, to these men of the Sanhedrin, who had not long ago been part of the group that had seen to it that Jesus was crucified, to hear this man, Stephen, say, this guy Jesus, who we put to death as a troublemaker, is now standing next to God. That was as if he were going to each one of them and slap them on the face. That was a challenge to them and their authority in the temple. So they walked at him. And enough of this. We're not worrying about taking this one to Pilate. We're just taking him outside and we're getting rid of him now. We don't want to hear any more of this stuff. Done. Finished. Over. And that's where Stephen's witness becomes even greater. Because his experience isn't only that he has seen Jesus, but he acts like him. He gives evidence that his life has been transformed by knowing Jesus, because as the men are stoning him, he says, lay not this sin to their charge. Didn't Jesus say the same thing on the cross? Stephen asks for forgiveness for the very people who are killing him. How many of us would have that courage today? How many of us would have the courage to say, would have the knowledge, the faith, the understanding that Stephen was given in that moment? But we're reminded then, as we read that Jesus said to the disciples as he left them, don't worry about what you will say. Don't worry about what it is that you're going to do when the authorities call you before them and say, give an account of yourself. What are you doing and why? Jesus told them, you'll be given the words to speak. And Stephen was. It is a gift that God gave Stephen in that moment to have the courage to speak truth to the power of the temple. It was a gift that he had the courage to face the people who were killing him and say, please forgive them. And then to say, Jesus, receive my spirit. How many of us are given that grace? But you see, that's what we come to worship for. To understand God's grace and to share with each other these stories. Not just the stories of the Bible, but what we've lost today is the ability to speak to each other and to say, how is it with your soul this week? What's going on in your life? Where have you experienced Jesus? What change has happened within you? Who have you worked with? How have you seen the face of God in your fellow human beings that you have worked with, that you have met, that you have run across, wherever you have been? If all of us are children of God, as we go out into the world, As we go about our daily lives, as anxiety-ridden or as peaceful as they may be, all of us see God daily. We interact with God daily. We have the opportunity to be with God daily. And how do we do that? What do we do? Can we make that prayer ours? For those who would oppress, are we able to say, forgive them? For those who would create problems for us, can we show forgiveness? And one of the commentators, it says that forgiveness, it struck me, forgiveness is not something we can do even with the most intense personal effort. True forgiveness is a gift from God. It is God's act within our lives. And to that, we are asked to bear witness. Can we do that with each other? Can we walk from the past? Can we walk through our lives and say, God, forgive me so that I can forgive those who irritate me or who I think have offended me? It comes back to that simple prayer Anne Lamott always speaks about. The first one she teaches, help me, help me, help me. So that in the end, we can say thank you to God. And she says the third prayer is, wow. And I can imagine Stephen standing before the Sanhedrin with a vision of Jesus standing next to God and saying, wow. How many of us are given that vision? Let alone given it moments before we die. My friends, that is our challenge. To learn to experience God, to be with each other, to share with each other our common experience, that in worship becomes our common practice, that we share with each other God's blessings in physical and financial resources or physical resources, but also we share with each other our hearts. And in this American culture of privacy, I know that really grates sometimes the wrong way. But it is to be open, to be transparent, to be vulnerable to each other. As vulnerable as Jesus was, as vulnerable as Stephen was. And to be able to say, help me, God. Thank you, God. Wow.